A heartbroken billionaire took his paralyzed daughter to the park, believing all hope was lost. He scoffed when a poor little boy offered her a simple, handmade toy. But what that toy made his daughter do next will leave you breathless. Have you ever witnessed a miracle? Let us know in the comments and get ready for a story that will restore your faith in the impossible. The silence in the back of the Maybach was the most expensive thing Julian Vance owned. It was a perfect, sterile quiet, engineered to insulate him from the chaos of the city he ruled. From his throne of hand-stitched leather, Julian watched the world slide by behind tinted glass, a series of muted colors and faceless people. His world was a fortress of steel and glass, of numbers on a screen that dictated the fates of thousands. He was the king of this kingdom, the isolated emperor of Vancetech, and his heart was as cold and empty as the penthouse suite that waited for him 30 floors above the grime of the street. In the custom-built seat beside him, his daughter Lily was just as silent. But her silence wasn't engineered. It was a prison. At 7 years old, she had her mother's radiant eyes and a spirit that, before the accident, had burned brighter than a supernova. Now that light was trapped behind a veil of stillness. The crash that had stolen his wife, Isabella, had also severed something vital in Lily's spine, leaving her legs as beautiful and useless as a doll's. The doctors had used words like permanent and irreversible. They had offered therapies and technologies, all of which Julian had funded with blank checks. But none of them could rebuild the bridge between her mind and her body. His driver pulled the car to a smooth stop at the edge of the public park. It was a place Julian despised, unpredictable, dirty, full of life he couldn't control. But Lily's physical therapist had insisted. Let her see other children play, Julian. Let her feel the sun. Julian's jaw tightened. He exited the car, the city air feeling foreign and raw in his lungs. He assembled the sleek carbon fiber wheelchair, its mechanics whirring softly as he unfolded it. Every sound was a reminder of his failure. He had built an empire that could touch the sky, but he couldn't make his own daughter walk. He lifted Lily from the car. She was feather-light, a fragile ghost in his arms. He settled her into the chair, her small hands resting limply on the wheels she couldn't turn. Her eyes, wide and brown, stared ahead, not at the vibrant green of the park, but at some distant point only she could see. He pushed her along the paved path, a black-suited king in a land of screaming children and laughing parents. He felt their stares, a mixture of pity and awe. He ignored them. He was here to perform a duty, a joyless ritual in the name of a hope he no longer possessed. They stopped near a sandbox where a flurry of activity buzzed like a hive. A little boy, no older than Lily, with clothes that were clean but worn thin at the knees, detached himself from the group. He clutched a small, clumsily carved wooden bird, its wings uneven, its paint chipped. He walked directly toward them, his eyes fixed on Lily. Julian's protective instinct flared. He put a hand on the back of Lily's chair, ready to wheel her away. The boy stopped a few feet away, his expression one of pure, uncomplicated sincerity. He held out the wooden bird. "For you," he said, his voice clear and soft. Julian almost scoffed. His daughter had toys worth more than this child's entire apartment building, dolls with microchips, tablets with custom learning software. What was this crude piece of wood? But Lily's head turned. It was a small movement, but it was the most voluntary motion she had made all day. Her gaze dropped from the distant sky and landed on the bird. The boy took a step closer, undeterred by Julian's stony glare. "His name is Pip," the boy said, placing the bird gently into Lily's lap. "He knows how to fly. You just have to show him." Julian opened his mouth to dismiss the child, to call him away from their private bubble of grief. But then he saw it, a tremor in Lily's right hand. Her fingers, which had lain still for 2 years, twitched. They curled slowly, painstakingly, around the painted wood. The world seemed to fall away. The sounds of the park, the laughter, the shouting, faded into a dull roar. All Julian could hear was the frantic pounding of his own heart. The boy smiled at Lily. "See? Now stand up and help him fly." It was a ridiculous, impossible command. Julian felt a surge of anger at the boy's naive cruelty. How dare he ask her to do the one thing she couldn't? But Lily's eyes were locked on the boy's. Her grip on the wooden bird tightened. Her brow furrowed in concentration. And then the impossible happened. Her legs tensed. The muscles, dormant for 24 months, contracted. Her small feet, clad in pink sneakers she'd never used, pressed against the footrest. With a shuddering gasp that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the universe, Lily pushed herself up. Her legs trembled violently, but they held. She was standing, unsteady, wavering, but standing on her own 2 feet in the middle of the park. Julian Vance froze. The isolated emperor, the man who controlled a global empire, could do nothing but stare. His multi-billion-dollar world, his entire understanding of reality, shattered into a million pieces. His paralyzed daughter was standing, and a little boy with a wooden bird had just made her walk for the first time. The hunt began the moment Julian's mind rebooted. The boy had vanished back into the chaos of the park, swallowed by the crowd. By the time Julian had recovered enough to carefully lower a trembling, exhausted Lily back into her chair, the child and his mother were gone. He had only a name, Pip, and the crudely carved bird now clutched in his daughter's hand like a holy relic. Back in the sterile silence of his penthouse, Julian paced like a caged tiger. The city sprawled beneath him, a grid of lights he could buy and sell. Yet he felt utterly powerless. Doctors were summoned. The best neurologists in the country flew in on his private jet, their faces a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. They examined Lily, who had slipped back into her quiet stillness, the burst of energy completely gone. They ran scans, reviewed charts, and spoke in hushed, technical terms. "Post-traumatic recovery can be unpredictable, one said, stroking his chin. "It could be a psychosomatic response," offered another, "a powerful emotional trigger causing a temporary bypass of the neural block." They used a dozen different phrases that all meant the same thing. They had no idea. It was a fluke. A 1 in a billion anomaly? They couldn't explain it, and they certainly couldn't replicate it. Julian dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Their science was useless. What he had seen was not a psychosomatic response. It was a miracle. And that miracle had a face, a name, and a worn pair of jeans. "Find him," Julian commanded into his phone, his voice a low growl. The man on the other end was Marcus Thorne, a former intelligence agent who now worked as Julian's private investigator. Marcus was the ghost who cleaned up his problems, the shadow who found what was lost. "Find who, Mr. Vance?" Marcus's voice was calm, professional. "A boy, 7, maybe 8 years old, at the public park on 5th and Grand. He was with his mother. He gave my daughter a wooden bird." Julian's voice cracked on the last 2 words. He cleared his throat, walling the emotion away. "I want to know everything. Who he is, where he lives, what he had for breakfast, everything. I'm sending you a picture of the bird." "Understood." For the next 48 hours, Julian was a storm of contained energy. He canceled board meetings, ignored frantic calls from his COO, his sister Evelyn, and sat by Lily's bedside, watching. He held the little wooden bird, turning it over and over in his hands. It was simple, imperfect, yet it held more power than all the technology in his entire company. He watched Lily's hands, her legs, searching for another twitch, another sign. Nothing. She was as she had been before. But something had changed. In her eyes, the vacant distance was gone. Now there was a flicker of what? Hope? A question? She was waiting. They both were. His sister Evelyn let herself into the penthouse. her heels clicking an impatient rhythm on the marble floor. She was sharp, elegant, and the only family he had left. She ran the operations of Vance Tech with a ruthless efficiency that mirrored his own. "Julian, what is going on?" she demanded, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together. "You missed the quarterly review. The board is getting nervous. There are whispers." "Let them whisper," he said, not taking his eyes off Lily. Evelyn's gaze softened as she looked at her niece. "How is she?" "The same," Julian said. Then, against his better judgment, the words spilled out. "She stood up, Ev, at the park. A boy. He gave her a toy, and she stood up." Evelyn's expression shifted. It wasn't disbelief. It was something else. Something he couldn't quite read. Pity? Concern? "Julian, you're exhausted. Grief can make you see things—" "I know what I saw," he snapped, his voice harsher than he intended. "Of course," she said soothingly, placing a cool hand on his shoulder. "I just worry about you, chasing ghosts. Maybe you should focus on the tangible. The new robotic exoskeletons from R&D. That's real science, Julian, not park magic." Her words were meant to be comforting, logical. But they felt like a dismissal. She was trying to pull him back into the world he knew, the world of data and balance sheets. He was no longer sure he wanted to go back. 2 days later, Marcus called. "I found him." Julian's entire body went rigid. "Tell me." "His name is Leo. He's 7 years old. Lives with his mother, Sarah Jenkins, in a 2-room apartment over in the warehouse district. She's a waitress at a diner downtown. Works double shifts most days. They're barely scraping by." Julian's mind reeled. A waitress. A boy from the poorest part of the city. There was no logical connection, no reason. "There's more," Marcus said, his voice hesitant. "I ran a deeper background check on Sarah Jenkins' standard procedure. Her husband, Leo's father, was a man named Daniel Jenkins." The name meant nothing to Julian. 2 years ago," Marcus continued, his voice low and heavy, "Daniel Jenkins was the driver of the truck that collided with your wife's car." The phone nearly slipped from Julian's hand. The air was sucked from his lungs. His blood ran cold. The accident. The night his world had ended. The official report had been clear. A drunk driver in a commercial truck had run a red light. The driver, Daniel Jenkins, had been declared at fault. He had vanished after the incident, a warrant out for his arrest. He was a ghost, a faceless villain who had destroyed Julian's family and his son. His son was the boy in the park. It wasn't a miracle. It was a curse, a twisted cosmic joke. The son of the man who took everything from him was the only person who could give a piece of it back. His obsessive investigation had led him not to an angel, but to the heir of his greatest enemy. The hunt for truth had ended in a nightmare. The revelation was a point of no return. Julian couldn't unknow it. The son of the man who killed Isabella was the key to Lily's recovery. The paradox was a knife twisting in his gut. For a full day he did nothing. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, staring down at the city, the name Daniel Jenkins echoing in his mind. Hate was a familiar feeling. For 2 years it had been a cold, hard stone in his chest. But now it was complicated. The face of the man he despised was overlaid with the face of a small boy with sincere eyes and a wooden bird. He had to see them. He had to understand. He drove himself, taking a nondescript sedan from his collection instead of the Maybach. The warehouse district was a world away from his polished skyscraper. Here the buildings were brick and rust, the streets were cracked, and the air smelled of exhaust and grit. He found the apartment building, a tired-looking structure with peeling paint and a broken front stoop. He climbed the creaking stairs to the 3rd floor. He could hear a woman's soft voice from inside apartment 3B, singing a lullaby. He knocked. The singing stopped. The door opened a crack, held by a chain. A woman's wary eye peered out. She was younger than he expected, with tired lines around her eyes that couldn't hide a fierce, protective energy. Sarah Jenkins. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suspicious. "My name is Julian Vance," he said. The name hung in the air between them, a declaration of war. Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her face. Fear, recognition, and something else, defiance. She tried to slam the door, but Julian put his hand against it. "Please," he said, the word feeling foreign and weak on his tongue. "I'm not here to... I need to talk to you. About your son, about my daughter." The chain stayed on, but she stopped pushing. "What about him?" "He made her stand," Julian said, the words raw. "Lily. She's been in a wheelchair for 2 years. Your son gave her a toy and she stood up. I don't understand how, but it happened." Through the crack he could see her expression soften from fear to confusion. She was the wounded guardian, her instinct to protect her child, warring with the impossible story he was telling. "I want to bring him to see her," Julian said, his voice low. "I'll pay you. Anything you want." The fear in her eyes was instantly replaced by a flash of anger. "My son is not for sale." "That's not what I meant," Julian backpedaled, clumsy in this world of genuine emotion. I need to see if it can happen again, for her. Please, I am begging you." Julian Vance, was begging. The Emperor was on his knees at the gates of a pauper's home. Sarah studied his face for a long, agonizing minute. She saw the desperation, the pain that transcended the gulf of wealth between them. Slowly, she slid the chain off. The apartment was tiny but immaculate. Toys were neatly stacked in a corner. A drawing of a smiling bird was taped to the wall. Leo was sitting at a small table, carefully painting another wooden figure. He looked up, his eyes lighting with recognition. "You're the sad man from the park," he said simply. Sarah put a protective arm around her son's shoulders. "Leo, this is Mr. Vance. His daughter is the girl you gave Pip to." Julian's gaze fell on the boy, the son of the monster from his nightmares. He saw no malice, no inherited sin. He saw only a child, an incorruptible heart. After a tense negotiation, Sarah agreed, not for money, but on her terms. She and Leo would come to the penthouse. She would not leave his side. If she felt for 1 second that they were being exploited or that her son was unsafe, they would leave. The next day, they arrived. Leo, dressed in his best shirt, looked around the cavernous, minimalist penthouse with wide eyes. Sarah stood beside him, a lioness in enemy territory. Julian led them to the sunroom, where Lily sat in her chair, staring out at the sky. "Lily," Julian said softly, "look who's here." Lily's head turned. Her eyes found Leo. A flicker of light, of recognition, returned to her gaze. Leo walked over to her, his small hand holding a new wooden carving, this one a clumsy-looking horse. "Pip was getting lonely," he said, placing the horse in her lap. "This is Gallop. He likes to run." Julian held his breath. Sarah gripped her hands together. Lily's fingers twitched. They curled around the horse. She looked from the toy to Leo, then to her own legs. A deep, shuddering breath racked her small frame. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the arms of her chair. She pushed. Her legs, which had been still for 2 years, save for that one moment in the park, straightened. She rose from the chair, wobbling like a newborn fawn, her entire body shaking with the monumental effort. She took a step, then another. 3 staggering, miraculous steps toward Leo before her legs gave out, and Julian rushed forward to catch her. He held his daughter in his arms, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against his. He could feel tears welling in his own eyes, hot and sharp. It was real. This boy, this impossible child, was the key. He looked up at Sarah. Her face was a mask of astonishment and awe. The wall of suspicion between them crumbled, replaced by a shared, fragile miracle. In that moment, they were not a billionaire and a waitress, not the victim and the family of the accused. They were just 2 parents, watching their children defy the impossible. A fragile alliance was born in that sunroom, built on the two most powerful forces in the universe: a child's hope and a parent's love. The progress was slow, but it was real. Twice a week, Sarah and Leo would come to the penthouse. Under their quiet encouragement, Lily began to reclaim her body. The sessions were not therapy, they were play. Leo didn't treat Lily like she was broken. He'd simply hand her a toy and say, "Let's make Gallop run to the window." And somehow Lily's legs would find the strength to shuffle a few steps. Julian watched, a silent observer. He saw the bond forming between the two children, a pure connection that transcended words. And he found himself drawn to Sarah. He saw her strength, the fierce dignity with which she carried her struggles. They rarely spoke of the accident, of the man who connected and divided them. Instead, they talked about their children. He learned that Leo carved the toys himself, a skill his father had taught him. Sarah spoke of her husband with a confusing mix of love and pain, always maintaining that Daniel wasn't a drinker, that something must have been wrong that night. Julian filed it away, unable to reconcile the loving father she described with the reckless monster from the police report. He started looking forward to their visits, to the sound of life and hesitant laughter in his silent home. The cold stone in his chest was beginning to thaw. But vipers strike when they smell warmth. His sister, Evelyn, observed the new arrangement with a tightening smile. "It's wonderful to see Lily improving," she'd say, her voice smooth as silk. But her eyes were cold, calculating. "This little boy and his mother, it's quite the charity case, Julian. Very noble of you." Julian ignored the bite in her words. "It's not charity, Evelyn, it's something else." He didn't see her slip her phone out after one visit, taking a photo of Sarah and Leo leaving the opulent lobby of his building. He didn't know she was meeting with a notorious journalist from a city tabloid. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. The headline was splashed across the front page in giant lurid letters: "Grieving billionaire exploits poor miracle boy for PR stunt." The article was a masterpiece of malicious insinuation. It painted Julian as a manipulative puppeteer, using a vulnerable single mother and her son to create a heartwarming story to boost his public image ahead of a major Vance Tech product launch. It twisted his desperation into a cynical marketing ploy. It featured Evelyn's photo of a tired-looking Sarah and a small Leo, dwarfed by the grandeur of Julian's world. An anonymous source close to the family was quoted expressing deep concern for the emotional manipulation of the Jenkins family. The viper in his nest had struck, and its poison was potent. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The media descended like vultures. Sarah's phone rang off the hook. When she took Leo to school, reporters ambushed her, shouting questions, their cameras flashing in her son's face. She called Julian, her voice trembling with rage and fear. "They're calling me a gold digger. They're saying you're using my son. Is this what this was, Julian? Was this all some sick game?" "No, Sarah, I swear," he pleaded, a cold dread creeping up his spine. "I don't know who did this." But the damage was escalating. That afternoon, 2 agents from Child Protective Services showed up at Sarah's apartment, citing an anonymous tip about an unstable and potentially exploitative environment. The threat was clear. She could lose her son. The public crisis was a firestorm, but the true threat was to the fragile trust he had built. Sarah, terrified and betrayed, cut off all contact. She wouldn't answer his calls. She moved, taking Leo, and disappearing into the city's anonymity to protect him. Lily felt the absence immediately. The light in her eyes dimmed. She retreated, her legs once again refusing to obey. The miracle was evaporating. Julian's grief transformed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. This wasn't a random reporter digging for dirt. The details were too specific, the quotes too calculated. The leak had come from inside his own circle, the source close to the family. There were only a handful of people who knew the situation. He summoned Marcus Thorne to his office. The city lights glittered below, mocking him. "I want to know who leaked the story," Julian commanded, his voice barely a whisper, yet more dangerous than any shout. "I want to know who made that call to CPS, and I want you to reopen the investigation into the accident 2 years ago. Every detail. Start with the truck Daniel Jenkins was driving. I want to know who serviced it, who owned it, who loaded it. Sarah said he wasn't a drinker. Let's find out if she was right." Marcus nodded, his face grim. "I'm on it." For the next few days, Julian was a ghost haunting his own empire. He went through the motions, but his mind was elsewhere, sifting through conversations, analyzing expressions. He watched Evelyn, who was a model of sympathetic concern. "It's a terrible business, Julian," she said, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "The press is despicable. Don't you worry, this will all blow over. Perhaps it's for the best. Getting involved with people like that, it was always going to be messy." Her words were perfect, but her eyes held a flicker of triumph. The call from Marcus came late on a Friday night. A storm was brewing outside, rain lashing against the panoramic windows of the penthouse. "You were right," Marcus said, his voice tight. "The leak came from a burner phone, but I tracked the purchase. It was bought with a cash withdrawal from an ATM 2 blocks from Vance Tower. We got the security footage. It was your sister's personal assistant." Julian's blood turned to ice. Evelyn's assistant wouldn't act without her orders. "And the call to CPS?" Julian asked, his voice hollow. "Same burner phone," Marcus confirmed. "But that's not the worst of it, Julian. The accident." Julian sank into a chair, the receiver trembling in his hand. "The trucking company Daniel Jenkins worked for went bankrupt 6 months after the crash," Marcus explained, his words coming fast and sharp. "But in the week leading up to it, they received a massive anonymous cash infusion, paid for a series of special maintenance requests on their fleet. I dug into the shell corporation that sent the money. It took some doing, but I unraveled it. The account belongs to Evelyn Vance." Julian couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. "The maintenance report on Jenkins's truck was falsified," Marcus continued, his voice like a death knell. "The mechanic who signed off on it was paid $50,000, wired from the same shell corp. The day after the accident, he quit his job and disappeared. Julian, the brakes on that truck weren't just faulty. They were intentionally disabled. This wasn't an accident. It was a setup." The truth crashed down on Julian with the force of a physical blow. Evelyn, his sister. She hadn't just leaked a story. She had orchestrated the crash. She had tried to murder his wife. She had paralyzed his daughter. The monster he had been hunting for 2 years wasn't a stranger named Daniel Jenkins. It was his own flesh and blood. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly evil, it defied comprehension. He looked at the family photos on his mantelpiece, and all he saw were lies. His entire life was a lie, built by the viper he had welcomed into his home. The storm outside broke, a crack of thunder shaking the tower to its foundations. It was nothing compared to the storm raging inside Julian Vance. Rage was a cleansing fire. The grief and confusion were burned away, leaving only a cold, lethal certainty. He now understood the look in Evelyn's eyes when he first told her about Lily Standing. It wasn't pity, it was fear. Fear that her perfect crime was about to unravel. The media leak, the CPS call, they weren't just attacks on Sarah and Leo. They were desperate attempts to sever the connection, to bury the truth forever. He needed one more piece, a confession. He arranged a meeting in the Vance Tech boardroom on the top floor. The space was his sanctuary of power, a glass-walled cage suspended over the city. He had Marcus set up discreet audio and video recording. Evelyn walked in, radiating confidence. She had weathered the media storm she created and believed she had won. "Julian," she said, her tone concerned, "you look terrible. You need to let this go for your own good." "I know it was you, Ev," he said quietly. She laughed, a brittle, dismissive sound. "Know what? That I'm worried about you? guilty as charged. You paid the mechanic. You disabled the brakes on that truck. He laid the facts out like cards on the table, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. You tried to murder Isabella. Her smile faltered. For a heartbeat, pure, unadulterated panic flashed in her eyes before being replaced by a chilling calm. The mask was off. She was making you weak, Evelyn hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. She was turning you into a doting husband, a sentimental father. Vance Tech was suffering. Our legacy was suffering. I did it for you, for us. Julian stared at her, at the stranger wearing his sister's face. You paralyzed your own niece. A regrettable, unintended consequence, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, but a small price to pay to get you back, to make you the emperor you were born to be, alone, focused, powerful. This was her motive, not just jealousy, but a twisted desire for control. She hadn't wanted to eliminate a rival for his love, she wanted to eliminate a rival for his soul. She wanted him to remain the isolated emperor, and she was the architect of his prison. And the boy? Julian pressed, needing to hear it all. Leo Jenkins? What did his family ever do to you? They were a loose end, she spat, a living reminder of a past you needed to forget. When you brought them into our lives, you were threatening everything. I had to get rid of them. I had to protect you. To protect what's ours. He had it. The whole monstrous truth, recorded for the world to see. Just then Evelyn's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and a cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. The final phase of her plan was in motion. It's too late for you to do anything about it, brother, she sneered. While you've been playing detective, I've been solidifying our future. Our largest competitor, Omnicorp, has initiated a hostile takeover. They've been buying up shares for months, using the bad press I created as leverage. The board is terrified. They're calling an emergency vote. Right now. She gestured to the large screen at the end of the table. Faces of board members began to pop up, dialing in for a video conference. Omnicorp's offer is a lifeline, a deal that will double our value. But their one condition is a change in leadership. They want me as CEO, she said, her eyes gleaming with victory. The vote is a formality. You have two options, Julian. Stand with me, endorse me as your successor, and we can rule a new, larger empire together, or fight me, and be remembered as the broken man who lost it all. His own phone buzzed. It was the hospital. Mr. Vance, Dr. Aris is ready. Lily's procedure is scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. It was the moral gauntlet, the final, terrible choice. On one side, the empire he had built, the culmination of his life's work, about to be stolen or saved. On the other, his daughter, facing a delicate procedure to implant neurostimulators, a long-shot surgery inspired by her miraculous progress, a chance to make her steps permanent. Evelyn saw him hesitate. Choose, Julian, she taunted, your crown or the cripple? Something inside Julian snapped. He looked at the faces on the screen, the men and women who cared only for stock prices and power plays. He looked at his sister, her face contorted by ambition and hate. Then he thought of Lily, of her staggering brave steps, of Leo's simple kindness, of Sarah's fierce, unwavering love for her son. He knew what his kingdom was now. It wasn't this glass tower. It was them. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the head of the table, looked directly into the main camera, and spoke, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The board meeting is canceled. Gasps echoed from the speakers. Evelyn's face went white with fury. As the majority shareholder of Vance Tech, Julian continued, I am not selling. I am not stepping down, and my sister, Evelyn Vance, is hereby terminated, effective immediately. He turned to Evelyn, his eyes burning into hers. You wanted an emperor. You've got one. He pulled out his phone, addressed his head of security on speakerphone. Martin, have the police meet you in the main boardroom. Escort Miss Vance there. She is not to leave the building." Kiram. Then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the smoking ruins of his old life without a single backward glance. He didn't wait for the fallout. He didn't care about the stock price or the hostile takeover. He pressed another button on his phone as he strode toward the elevator. "Marcus," he said, "release it all. The recording, the financial records, everything. Send it to the district attorney and every major news outlet in the country." "With pleasure," Marcus replied. Julian stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on the shocked faces of the board and the pure murderous rage on his sisters. As the car descended, he was no longer choosing between his empire and his family. He was choosing his family, and in doing so, he was finally saving himself. He had a procedure to get to. He had a daughter to fight for. The hospital waiting room was a sterile, anxious limbo. Julian sat, not as a CEO, but as a father. He had traded his suit jacket for a hospital visitor's pass. He had called Sarah on the way, found her hiding out in a small motel across town. He had explained everything in a rush of words, the setup, Evelyn's betrayal, the evidence. He had asked her, begged her, to meet him there. For Lily. Just as the surgeon came out to give him a pre-op update, Sarah arrived with Leo in tow. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but full of a new, dawning understanding. She looked at Julian, at the raw vulnerability on his face, and all the anger and betrayal she had felt toward him melted away, replaced by a profound empathy. "Is she—" Sarah started. "She's strong," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "She gets that from her mother." Leo, sensing the gravity, walked over and slipped his small hand into Julian's. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, a small, solid anchor in the terrifying storm. News alerts began to light up the phone screens of everyone in the waiting room. Vance Tech Co. arrested in shocking conspiracy. Evelyn Vance accused of 2022 murder attempt. The headlines were sensational, the details damning. Evelyn's public arrest, escorted in handcuffs from the Vance Tower lobby, was already going viral. The empire was in flames, but Julian felt nothing but relief. He had chosen correctly. He had exiled the betrayer. Hours later, the surgeon appeared, his mask down, a tired but gentle smile on his face. "The procedure was a success," he said. "The stimulators are in place. Now comes the hard part, rehabilitation. But she has a fighter's spirit." Relief washed over Julian so powerfully his knees felt weak. He looked at Sarah, and she was crying silent tears of joy. He looked at Leo, who was beaming. In that moment, under the harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital, a new kingdom was forged. 6 months later, the autumn sun cast a golden glow over the park, the same park where his world had been shattered and rebuilt. Julian pushed a swing, not a wheelchair. In the seat, Lily giggled, her legs kicking freely, reaching for the sky. The braces on her legs were sleek and silver, but they were a symbol not of weakness, but of her incredible strength. She could walk now with a slight limp that doctors believed would fade in time. She could run. Nearby, Sarah and Leo were spreading a checkered blanket on the grass. Leo held up a new wooden carving, a squirrel with a bushy tail. After Evelyn's conviction, the truth about Daniel Jenkins had come out. He was exonerated, his name cleared. He had fled not from guilt, but from fear, threatened by Evelyn's people. With Julian's help, Marcus had tracked him down, and the Jenkins family was slowly, carefully, piecing itself back together. Vance Tech had survived. After the scandal, the stock had plummeted, but Julian had weathered the storm. He'd sold off 2 divisions, streamlined the company, and appointed a new, trusted COO. He worked less, delegating more. His empire was smaller, but his life was infinitely larger. He stopped pushing the swing, and Lily hopped off, running on her steady legs toward the blanket. She plopped down next to Leo, the two of them immediately absorbed in the world of Pip, Gallop, and the new squirrel. Julian walked over and sat down on the blanket next to Sarah. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. It was easy. It was right. "Look at them," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Julian looked at his new family, at his daughter, whole and happy, at the resilient boy who had shown him what true strength was, at the fierce, loving woman beside him who had taught him how to hope again. The silence that surrounded him now wasn't the sterile, expensive quiet of a Maybach. It was a comfortable, peaceful silence filled with the sound of children's laughter and the rustling of leaves. He was no longer the isolated emperor ruling from a glass tower. He was here, on the ground, a part of the beautiful, unpredictable world. He had lost an empire and gained everything. This was his kingdom. And it was perfect.